Hey, Bob, thank you so much for joining us on this call today.
Oh, my pleasure to be with you.
It's such an honor to have you on this conversation. Thank you so much. Bob, tell me about an experience from your childhood that has left a deep impact on you as a person that you are today.
Well, the first thought that came to mind was welding in the basement. My dad was an engineer, and one of his ways of being in a relationship was through work. And so he would design these massive steel construction projects, like to build a big diving tower and dock for a YMCA camp up in Michigan. And we would spend our summers reading blueprints and trying to figure out how to put this stuff together. And I learned so much from him in that about work and about how to see things three-dimensionally and how to see how things fit together and how to build things. And I learned about math, I learned about geometry, all of which came back in a different form in the construction of the Leadership Circle profile. So those are some of my favorite moments, down there with my welding mask on and smoke everywhere. And we had a massive steel fabrication shop in our basement.
Yeah. How would you define Bob of 5 years old?
5 years old, I landed in a new neighborhood full of a family that, we were strangers and we were not welcome. We became welcome, but it took some time. And so early on, I felt very inadequate and didn't know how to ingratiate myself. I didn't know how to fund a sense of belonging and self-worth and esteem in this neighborhood where I felt very alien in a sense. And so that has played a role, as all things do, in the work that has emerged. Robert Bly says we, as leaders, or his work was with men, that men will make their greatest contribution to the community from the wound. Right? And so this was part of a wounding experience for me as a 5-year-old.
Thank you so much for sharing this. Bob, in one of the conversations that I was listening, you mentioned that you visited India first time in the year 1981.
Yes.
So share an experience from your first visit to India.
Well, I'll share too. We was with my brother, and there's a long story behind it, but we ended up on a train, second class, from Delhi to Patna, and stopping along the way and so on. But it took days. And so to be in the second class car with just benches and people packed in there and goats and chickens and, was a miserable experience. Hot, noisy, cramped. And I realized it was an invitation to notice that I funded my sense of happiness externally. Like, I don't have the comforts around me. I can't escape from this miserable experience. And then that invited me to just drop in and notice that at the core, I could feel joy in spite of all this, in the midst of all this. And as I just kept my attention there for 3 days in this sweatbox, it became a very, very beautiful experience. And I understood at some level what India is about, that experience. And it's interesting now because I find myself coming back to that and remembering in another way what I learned there in that second class car traveling across India. And then the last piece I might mention was we spent 3 days in Mother Teresa's home for the dying. And we literally left from there to go on our trip to Bangkok. And that was an extraordinarily moving and powerful experience to see that degree of suffering. And you could literally pick these men up. When we walked in the first time, they were all in the shower. And they were laying on the floor because they could not support their own weight. So they were showered all naked, and you would just pick them up and carry them back to their bed, and they were light. It's easy to pick them up. And then I got very, very sick. And I'm literally throwing up in the back. And I get to a point where I can't really function anymore. I'm so sick. And I lay down on one of the cots in Mother Teresa's home for the dying. And again, this practice of, wow, I'm experiencing even just a little bit in my own body what these people are experiencing. And I felt grateful. I was very, very sick. I ended up in the clinic later that day with 105 fever. But the experience was one of gratitude for the experience of the suffering that so much of humanity endures.
While I'm listening to you, this reminds me of one of the stories from Ramana Maharishi. And Ramana Maharishi was very, very sick. And while he was lying on the bed, he asked this question from himself, who is dying? And that was the moment when he got enlightenment.
Yes.
And then he started asking himself this question, who am I? And those 3 words is the gift that he offered to the world.
Yeah. Very beautiful. Because I'm not my body. I'm not Bob Anderson. You reference this body as Bob Anderson, but I'm not Bob Anderson. And I'm not in Bob Anderson. Right? Bob Anderson actually arises in me. So it's a powerful, powerful question. Who am I and who is dying?
So how far have you traveled in this journey of who am I?
Well, I don't know. It's an infinite journey. I'm reading Yogananda's autobiography right now. It's my bedtime reading. And I'm realizing how little I know or have experienced of what the great Indian sages have known for millennia. It's really remarkable reading. And yet I do feel that I have tasted the one taste, or at least an edge of it, where it becomes obvious, however subtly, that there is no Bob Anderson. There is an arising of a body-mind here, but I'm not that. And I'm prior to that. And I'm prior to many dimensions, all arising from unity. And that this is the great tradition, I think, that India has held for the world, is that there's only unity. Only.
Thank you so much, Bo, for digging deeper into this conversation. Sometime early this year, we were revisiting the name of the company. And I was contemplating with the other board of members, and we came up with the term called ex-monks. And then we were looking for a tagline. And then we came up with the tagline called A Journey into Shunya and Expansion. And people ask me, hey, Gaurav, why it's a journey into shunya and expansion? Why not a journey from shunya to expansion? Shunya means zero. And I said, it's not a journey about shunya to expansion. It's a journey into shunya and into expansion. And I remember the first conversation that I had with you, Bob, where we were talking about the concept of non-duality.
Yeah.
What are your views on that?
Well, it's only the self that goes on a journey of expansion. So I, as Bob Anderson, go on a journey of development and expanding into higher stages of adult development or consciousness. And of course, all the great spiritual traditions have these journey maps, the progressive stages of development. First, egoically, here's how the ego evolves, and then post-egoically, how the ego surrenders into non-duality, or even prior to non-duality is unity itself, divinity, only one. So from the perspective of the self, the separate self, it looks like I'm on a journey. From the perspective of your supreme identity, you never journeyed. There was no journey. You were always already enlightened. You never left the higher dimensions, right? You simply precipitated a form that now is on a journey, or thinks it's on a journey, right?
Yeah. Let me just absorb everything that you said. Bob, you are an authority in leadership development. And the organization that you run, the leadership circle, the full circle, the mission statement is raising the conscious practice of leadership, supporting authentic leadership, transformation change from the inside out. Now, I would request you if you can just go back in the moment when you thought to yourself that this is the area that you would like to explore. I'm just wondering, what was that eureka moment when you decided to launch this work for yourself?
Well, as you can tell from what we've talked about already, I've had my life has been informed spiritually from early age, and it's been the primary love of my life. And so I didn't know what to do with it. I started out in manufacturing, making dog food, and the kind of eureka moment was in the middle of the night. The plant was down. It was a brand new plant, and it was the most technologically advanced feed manufacturing facility in the United States in 1979 when it was built. Mm-hmm. And I was running that plant, and it was down again, and we were working late into the night trying to get it fixed and back online. And then I was outside unloading ingredients into the plant so we had the materials to make feed. And I was sweeping out the inside of a railroad car, and I was exhausted, and I propped my feet up inside the car. It was hopper bottom, so I just propped my feet up inside just to catch my breath. I had my dust mask on, as we see people now with masks on all over the world. And out of my mouth, completely unreflected, came, "I'm not becoming who I am." And it was authoritative. I said it out loud. It was like, where did that come from? Who said that? And I knew it was true. And that moment led me here. I began to reflect on, who am I? What am I here for? And I particularly pulled in a book came my way called Letters to a Young Poet. And in that, Rilke was writing to a young poet, and the poet is trying to say, should I be a poet? Should I be a poet? And Rilke says, no, you're asking me. You need to ask yourself. You need to go into yourself and search for the reason that bids you write. The question he asks is, in the stillest hour of your night, ask yourself, must I write? Must I write? And if you answer that in the affirmative, then build your life according to that necessity. And so I started to ask myself, in the middle of the night because I was working nights. This plant was right. What must I be about with my one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver says. And that became the kind of crystallizing moment. And I wrote about it. I wrote a journal about it. And then I didn't know what to do with it. I'm making dog food. What do I do with this? I want to help people grow and develop emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. What do I do with that? But the declaration was the beginning.
I come across several people who say, that's not what I meant for.
Yeah.
And the way you ask this question, I'm not becoming who I am.
Yeah.
Now, one of the biggest challenges that I come across is when people ask me, Gaurav, what should I do about it? So how did you pick up the courage for yourself to let go of what you were doing and initiate your journey to become who you are meant to be or who you are?
Yeah, it did take some courage. I realized after writing that journal about 6 months later, I hadn't done anything with it. I'd stuffed it in a drawer and I hadn't looked at it. And when I got into it, I went, okay, I'm scared. I don't know how, and I'm scared. And this was a family business, so it meant leaving, a lot.
Yeah.
And I went on retreat to try to summon up the courage, I suppose. I went on an 8-day retreat. And on that retreat, the spiritual director had given me a reading to read. And I decided to do it up in the mountains. I decided to walk up into the mountains. This was out in Wyoming. So I walked out of town. I was at the University of Laramie in Wyoming, and I started walking out of town, and I had no food. So I stopped at a store to get some fruit and some, food. And I'm walking. I walk out, and it looks like it's going to storm. And I think to myself, I should turn around. It's gonna storm here. And a voice in me said, keep walking. So I kept walking, and then it got really dark and really windy. And I go, it's gonna downpour here. I should turn around. And the voice in me said, keep walking. So I did. And then I get up and I'm just into the early, mountains, and it starts to pour rain, and it actually starts to hail, And I look for shelter. I turn to my left, and here's a cave. And I get in this cave. It's just a little one, just enough to cover me. And in that cave is a piece of plastic, visqueen plastic, that I could cover myself and stay warm and dry. And then I start the reading, and it's in the Old Testament and Christian scripture of God's call to Abraham to leave the land that he knows for the land I will show you. And Abraham says, could you be a little more specific here? I got to leave everything behind for what? And he says, kind of, I'll show you, And I went, okay, I gotta make this move. I don't know where it's leading. I get it. It's time to move. I came home, and within a week I was in a master's program in organization development that I didn't even know about. I didn't even know the field.
Okay, and that's how you entered this space. I'm just
Yes.
wondering, while you were reading that scripture, he said, leave the land and I will show you the next.
No.
As a person, what did you leave that allowed you to embrace your new self?
Well, I left a kind of career trajectory. I was I was part of a family business. I was a partner in that business. I had a future in that business. I could look up the line and see myself in the senior leadership. It's now a Fortune 500 company. So it was, I had a career all mapped out. And I knew that it wasn't the right career for me. And I didn't know what the right career was.
I'm just wondering.
So I took one step, right? I started a master's program. And the story around that is really interesting because I was like, well, I want to help people grow and develop. I don't know anything about how to do that. I don't want to be a priest. I don't think psychologist is right I don't know how to do that. And then I remembered there was a training that I went to, sponsored by the company. I said, I'm going to go talk to those guys that put on that training. And I went in and I said, tell me what you do and how you, I'm kind of interested. And they did. And one particular guy was very, very profound influence. He was a beautiful man. But he said, you should go talk to this other guy who just graduated from this master's program in Bowling Green, which is 20 minutes down the road from where I live. And I went in and I talked to him about it. And he says, by the way, it starts next week. I said, really? So I called up the head of the department and he just said, yeah, come on down. Don't even bother to enroll. Just attend the class. And if you like it, we'll enroll you. If you don't, no problem. And so a week later, I was in a master's program in organization development. This is how it unfolds when you're on purpose.
Yeah.
Right? Things, synchronicities happen. Doors open. As Joseph Campbell said, when you're on purpose, all the doors open. When you're not, they all remain closed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So who's the one who has inspired or influenced you the most in your journey of becoming a leadership consultant, authority in the space?
Yeah, Peter Block. Peter Block, I got connected with early on in my career. There's a lot of story there, but Peter was writing a book which became The Empowered Manager, which was, when it came out, was one of the best-selling books in management. And what Peter was actually trying to do was say, how do we get the real conversation, the honest conversation, to happen in the meeting instead of the bathroom? You go to the bathroom at break in the meeting and you hear this conversation like, can you believe what's going on? I can't believe it. We're same old, same. I wish, And then you come back to the meeting and you say, how's it going? They go, fine. Everything's great. Milestones, objectives, we're doing great. So how do you open up that and have really courageous, direct, authentic conversations about tough and complex issues and do it really well? And what he ran into was caution. You can't tell the truth in this organization. If I tell the truth, I'm dead. And then he said, well, what's bigger than the caution? What do you love more than you fear? What's worth the risk? If you haven't got that clear, then you won't take it, right? Yeah. And so that comes back to must, right? What must I be about with this one life, right? And so that workshop was very powerful because it started me learning about the deeper work of getting clear about what matters. And then how we recoil into various patterns of fear, or what he called manipulation, because we're advocating, because his work was around positive politics, or how do you get the real conversation in the room? So the inverse form of that is some form of manipulation, where we're indirect and inauthentic, and we're trying to maneuver you to give me what I want. And so when we're maneuvering like that, we use different strategies. And those strategies are now in the leadership circle. So in complying with the manipulative strategy, he called them political scripts, are, now that I'm so nice, so loyal, so agreeable, so supportive, will you give me what I want? The controlling strategy is, now that I'm so perfected, so brilliant on results, so hard charging, so in control, will you give me what I want? The protecting strategy is, now that I'm so super rational, brilliant, articulate, um, and convincing. Will you give me what I want?
Mm.
Well, that intersected with a number of theories, but Peter mentored me. He's a profound. We still get together. He's just been a profound influence on my life, and he was my mentor into this work.
And I think the kind of work that you have done, you've actually integrated his work really well.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, while I was just listening to you, it reminded me of what Martin Luther King Jr. said once. He said, if you have not identified something that you're willing to die for, you're not fit to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was once reading my early upbringing was Christian. So there's a statement Jesus says, a man has no greater love than to lay his life down for his friends. Right. And of course, he was laying his life physically down through crucifixion.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, I don't think I'm called to be crucified. So what am I willing to lay my life? What am I laying my life down for? Right. And I didn't have an answer. I have lived into that answer, but it's a very powerful question.
Yeah. So you've been living with these existential questions since your childhood, I can say.
Yeah, I would say it started in high school, at least consciously. Yeah. So, around 17, when I really said, okay, I got to pursue this.
So, Bob, you've done a lot of work with few of the best leaders in the world. And you often share in your leadership development work that leadership is spiritual boot camp. Why do you say so?
Well, it's hard. It's really hard. It's demanding. Having had a business grow up around me in the form of the leadership circle and grow into a global enterprise, I was challenged every day, and I was challenged, technically I was challenged with the having to really understand the finances and the marketing and the strategy and all that, the business acumen side of running the business. So the outer game leadership. But I also had to get more and more able to hold complexity, hold conflict, be in conflict in a way that was generative of new solutions or breakthrough ideas or a different way of thinking. And all of that required me to mature the inner game. And so leadership is a crucible, like the alchemy metaphor. It's a crucible of pressures that if you do the work, if you give yourself over to that, it can transform you, the pressure of it. So it is a spiritual pressure, and the complexities we're in now, even prior to COVID, but certainly now with COVID on the scene, there's tremendous evolutionary pressure or adaptive pressure that we're under as leaders. We have to find new ways of leading effectively and collectively and agilely in a constantly morphing and disrupted business context or organizational context. And that requires a level of maturity in our meaning-making system, in our decision-making system, in the way we take in the world, make sense of it, what we pay attention to, what we don't pay attention to, how we process it, the mental models that we bring to that may need updating, the identity that we have established and that is mediating us into the world. So leadership is the deployment of self into circumstances, right? You are your primary asset in any circumstance as a leader. and how you show up in that moment has everything to do with what can happen in that moment. Do I show up in a way that's generative of new ideas and creative possibilities, or do I show up in a way that closes that conversation down or contracts it?
Yeah.
And so who I am, the assumptions that I have formed throughout a lifetime of this is me, this is how I have to be seen in order to be successful. Well, those things reach limits under this pressure. And they either get surrendered or metamorphosized into a higher order structure, like the larva becomes the butterfly. Either we allow this pressure to have that effect on us, or we remain the larva and we're outmatched by the complexities of the challenges. But if we can metamorphosize, which is a fundamental shift in the structure of our inner game, we are now much more capable of kind of winged life, higher perspective, agile, faster motion, right? And so this butterfly effect is what we're in, and it's a spiritual boot camp. And it's unrelenting. Yogi has a line in a poem about the enemy storming the gates of the castle. So the enemy's outside laying siege on the castle. And in the poem he says, and his camp is out there, and he says, he sends no one into the city to threaten or promise, and no one to negotiate. So this evolution, there is no negotiation with complexity. We either evolve or we're falling further behind. And that's the spiritual boot camp. And it cuts both ways. It's a sharp two-edged sword.
Yeah. This connects to one of the statements that you have often shared in your speeches, where you talk about the structure determines performance. And here also you were talking about structure, that how through the process of metamorphosis, it shifts internally, right? How the larva converts into a butterfly. So when you're saying that structure determines performance, how does that fit in in the context of a human being?
Well, first of all, it's what I learned when I was welding. The structure determines performance. I actually designed some of my own stuff and built it, and it didn't hold up very well. And I learned early that, design is the primary determinant of performance. So the next things I built were pretty strong, So this is an engineering principle, but it's also a system principle, right? The design of anything is its primary determinant of performance. So you're designed perfectly for the performance you're getting. And consciousness is a structure. It's you have been designing your inner game for a long time. And it's an invisible structure, much like an operating system is an invisible structure, but it's a design. It's actually, and that's why, Microsoft and Apple are constantly improving the operating system, because with each upgrade, more becomes possible.
And they've been able to handle the complexities at a much faster and with a lot of ease as well. Correct.
And perfect. And so consciousness determines performance. And this is also a spiritual principle. I mean, in the book, As a Man Thinketh, he basically outlines this principle of your outer circumstances will be harmoniously organized to match your inner state. So what you hold in consciousness tends to manifest. So there is a structure, an inner game structure, and we map that out in our work. Here's the structure of reactive mind. Here's actually how it structurally functions. and why it's designed to maintain equilibrium. It's designed to oscillate like a thermostat.
Hmm.
Right? A thermostat never doesn't maintain a steady room temperature. It turns the furnace or the air conditioning on and off to maintain steady state. And that's a structure. It's called a balancing loop structure. And then the early stages of our inner game are designed that way. They're run out of fear.
Yeah.
And so I see a problem or a threat, I react to that to remove it. And if I'm successful, I've removed the problem. I haven't necessarily resolved the system that generated the problem. I've solved the problem. But more importantly, I've attenuated my fear. So as the problem goes away, so does my fear. My threat that the problem, right? And so the very motive for swinging into gear and attacking the problem goes away. And furthermore, when I'm in fear, I tend toward a quick fix, which moves me toward I fix the symptom of the problem, not redesign the system that's giving rise to the problem.
Got it.
And so it's not complex enough for the kind of complexities we're in.
Yeah.
And the next inner game, what we call creative, is not problem focused, it's vision focused. And there I have problems, I have fears, but the primary driver now is my passion for what I'm trying to create, love. Matters more than my fear. So I'm going to have the fear. It's going to scare the hell out of me to create my own business, go out on my own, do all that's good, right? But there's something bigger than that now that's pulling me forward, pulled forward by a future I don't yet fully know. And I take action in service of creating that. And that structure is generative. It's a growth loop. It doesn't tend toward maintaining. It tends towards creating an equilibrium between current reality and my vision. So it tends toward moving current reality toward what I want. And that's the fundamental structure of really highly generative, creative leaders. Leaders that create futures to which they and others aspire.
In fact, while I'm just listening to you, this also resonates with the kind of work Ronald Heifetz has done in the space of adaptive leadership.
Yes.
Yeah.
So adaptive challenge is one that you can't solve. It's a set of dilemmas. And the important thing here is it's a set of dilemmas. It's not just one. Or one, it wouldn't be that complex. But when there's 10 of them that all need to be solved simultaneously, and none of them have easy solutions, and maybe there is no solution, it's only a polarity to be managed.
Yeah.
Like, should we be centralized or decentralized? Well, the answer is yes. You're constantly working.
Beautiful.
Right. And so when we have a set of those that have to be solved simultaneously, that's really complex. That puts us in over our head. And like Einstein said, it can't be solved. These kind of complexities can't be solved from the consciousness that created them. Yeah. That consciousness is going to design what it knows. So the adaptive challenge means we have to move to a higher order of meaning making in order to solve that challenge.
Yeah. In your book, you have mentioned several times about transformation. Now, what do you think is the most important trait for a leader to initiate the journey of transformation?
Well, I wouldn't call it a trait. I'd call it a practice. So we all have different traits, personality types and traits, and which are different than competencies, which are skills and capabilities. Yeah. This I would put more as a practice, and there are three primary ones that are really fundamental. One is, what do I really want? This whole must, purpose, what's pulling me, and starting to orient on that as the primary compass bearing of my leadership. and our leadership collectively as an organization. So in conscious, John Mackey's book, Conscious Capitalism, one of the principles, the foundational pillars of conscious capitalism is higher purpose. So how do I get a whole organization wrapped around a higher order purpose? Well, that's also an individual practice. I have to be authored by that, right? It's authoring me. That's one practice. And then we distill that into a vision and strategy and goals and choices, right? That's the what we call the ascending practice. Pulled forward by my aspirations, by the call of the soul, if you will. Then there's the descending practice that will pull me into my fear. It will pull me, it will require transformation of me. And so I have to look at my fears, my doubts, the mental models, assumptions that are now too small for what's wanting to emerge. And that means I have to learn the practice of getting clear about how I get in my own way. And what we'll find usually is at the core of that is fear. And at the core of fear is my very survival.
Yeah.
Right? It comes right down to the tiger in the jungle is chasing me, right? And I'm in fear for my very existence.
Yeah.
And when we look around that, we'll see what Covey called dependence. I have an externalized sense of self. I'm worried about how you're going to see me. And you have to see me as the one who knows, or the one who's in control, or the one who's loyal. Or if you don't experience me that way, then I fall from credibility in your eyes. I lose space, and that feels like death. It's not death, but it's scary.
Yeah, it feels like death.
It feels like death.
Yeah.
And so it is ego death.
Yeah.
Because I've constructed an identity that depends on you validating me.
Yeah.
And seeing me as this leader that I take myself to be in every moment.
Yeah.
So it's becoming a student of your fear. And when you see that as an illusion, like when I saw that I want to lead and I got to have everybody like me, that was early, right? When I saw that in my life, and I realized that the core of it was you define me and I'm okay if you like me. My worth equals you liking me. That equation is false. It's actually not true at all. Made sense as a kid.
Yeah.
Made a lot of sense as a kid, but it's still running me. And so transcending that, seeing it as an illusion, you immediately opens you into, well, what would I do if I wasn't so worried about your approval? And that's the ascending current. What would I do if I could? So there's two, how do I get in my own way? What do I care about? Those two work together to evolve you. And then the third practice is what I learned from Peter Block, which is how do I then translate that into honest, authentic, transparent communication? How do I show up? The practice of showing up in every moment as an embodiment of that which I'm espousing, the vision that I hold for the whole organization. How do I embody that in every encounter? And that is a spiritual practice.
So well explained and so well captured in the simplest possible manner. Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you so much. So, Bob, in as many simple words as you have been able to explain it, I'm sure it's a lifelong journey. So, what do you think are the top 2 mistakes leaders make in this journey?
We sponsor change. We sponsor organizational transformation. And we don't notice that we have to lead it, that the leaders we see that really transform their organizations start with themselves. And they say, okay, I have the most to learn here. And there's a kind of radical, there is a radical transparency, radical humanity, and a vulnerability, and a learning out loud, and then a taking responsibility for the development of leaders in the organization. I'm the chief development officer. When I delegate that to HR or sponsor a change effort and not notice that I and we as senior leaders need to be transformed by the transformations we sponsor, right? When that mistake happens, the change effort is dead.
Yeah.
It will be a flavor of the month. And so each person needs to take responsibility for the change effort, and it has to start at the top, or it really doesn't have a chance. Then I think the second mistake, and this is, I don't know if it's a mistake, but it's developmental, is we stay with our technical capability too long. So when we did our research on the most effective, high creative, low reactive leaders and compared them to the least effective, high reactive leaders, so like upper quartile, lower quartile on effectiveness, and then we studied the written comments. We wrote this up in our book, Scaling Leadership. Reactive leaders' strengths, the most mentioned strengths of reactive leaders were technical, intellectually brilliant, creative in terms of generative ideas and brilliant in that way, and contributing in that way, good domain knowledge, and so on, technical capability. Those were the primary strengths. The most high creative leader strengths, they had those, but what was most mentioned by a wide margin were people capabilities, interpersonal, good with people, teams, so on. And it surprised us the degree to which that was described. And so not making the transition from the technical capability that I have been developing and need to develop to the ability to be good with people at every level of scale, one-on-one, one on self, one on others, one-on-one, one on team, one on many, and then team on team, like our team as a senior leadership team is taking responsibility for developing teams in the organization. If that doesn't happen, then transformation in the ways that we're talking about it now in terms of more agile, adaptive, innovative, engaged organizations won't happen. And so starting with myself and then moving it to the team, but learning and developing the kind of requisite interpersonal capability that's required to scale. You can't scale through your own technical expertise. It all has to come through you. It's too limited, right? However brilliant you are, it's just too limited. But if I can scale that to 10 leaders on my team and then into their teams, then I'm actually getting a significant multiple on my leadership, right? And I don't lose my technical capability. I'm still, right? You don't lose that. You multiply it.
But I'm sure there's a lot of fear that a leader would go through in this journey.
Yeah.
So help me understand. Let's say if you were to identify one lever that if you could press that could help this leader to move from operating from reactive tendencies to start to operate from creative competencies, what would be that one lever that we need to press or push or pull?
Well, that's a really great question, because my answer is I don't think there is one. That's why we created the Leadership Circle profile.
Mm-hmm.
because the lever in you could be quite different than the lever in me. Where that opening is could be
Mm.
quite different. And so, in a general way, I talked about in terms of what do you want and how do you get in your own way. So getting some of that clarified. But we, for example, we're talking with a leader, and when we walked into the office, he said, "Well, I just want to be really clear with you. I'm not going to hug you when you leave.
Mm.
I'm not that kind of leader. I'm not a touchy-feely type. So don't expect anything, right?" And of course, his scores on the profile were low on relationship, which we just talked about as being essential, and really high technically and capably around, but very controlling and
Mm.
autocratic because he had to run it all, right?
Mm.
The lever for him was he had low balance score,
Mm.
personal balance, life work balance. So the opening came with how much are you working?
Mm.
And oh well, and then this leader had just been promoted into, or just had more, like a lot more of the organization reporting to him. And so you're 24/7 now. You're at limits to scale. I don't think you've met limits to scale
Mm.
in your leadership. What do you mean by that? Well, let's
Mm.
talk about that. And that became a huge opening.
Yeah.
For someone else, it could be quite different.
Mm.
I noticed this low score on courageous authenticity. And then you're into a whole conversation that might be like, if I tell the truth, I'm dead. I have to have others see me as loyal, supportive, agreeable all the time, or I feel at risk.
Mm.
So there's many entry points into the tension between my innate competency or what it takes to be an effective leader and my earlier conditioning that has me showing up as a caterpillar, right? Too small
Mm.
for the role and so how I get clear on what one or two things I need to bring out. What's the one move that if I made it would unlock my leadership,
Mm.
take it to a whole new level? And then what's the one assumption, or as Bob Keegan says, the one big thing that I have to unhook from
Yeah.
in order to show up that way? And if I work that, my whole leadership can move to another level.
Yeah. And while I was just listening to you, I could actually go deep within my own self and check what do I need to unhook from.
Yeah,
It'll help
exactly.
me to show up the way I would like to show up in this world.
Yeah, and that's never ending.
Hmm.
So I'm in the same reflection right now, right? Because I'm
Hmm.
pulled into the next wave of my work, which scares the hell out of me, which I don't know how to do. And so I'm meeting yet another layer of fear. And it's actually really intense fear,
Hmm.
because the self that I've constructed is too small for what wants to come through.
Hmm.
I can't speak about unity which is where I want to be pulled into more of a unity, integral unity, like the next level of leadership. We're calling it integral informed by grace. So it's post what we call creative. And to speak about that, I have to speak from that. And
Hmm.
that requires that I learn how to show up and more of who I really am, which means the old self, I'm meeting the limits of my current construction of self. It's scary.
Yeah. You said something really beautiful. You said, in order to speak about something, you have to speak from something.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, at this stage in your life, what are you excited about today?
Well, it's obviously a really tumultuous time in the world. And so on one level, we're like everybody else trying to work, how do we navigate our organization successfully through this with minimal impact on our people and customers and so on. So it's a very challenging time. What I'm most excited about is that in this, there is an opening for a conversation around how we have been leading the world is inadequate. It's just inadequate.
Yeah.
And there's an opening for a conversation around what's the next level of leadership that's required. And I mentioned it, I think it's this highly mature, integral, informed by grace, informed by unity, informed by intuition. Gandhi was a great example of this kind of leadership. And there are others that we are working with, senior leaders in large organizations that are taking on amazing global challenges with their business. And are speaking in a way that would suggest that they're moving into this level of leadership that we call integral leadership. And so to explore that and to really understand that and start to articulate and frame that up is what I'm really excited about now.
You know, as I'm just talking to you, and you also mentioned about Mahatma Gandhi, I personally feel that when in confusion, it's always good to go back to basics.
Yeah.
And with the kind of volatility and the ambiguity that we are dealing with, nobody has got any answer to that. Now, how together we all can come together. And again, going back to what Ronald Heifetz talks about in his book, Adaptive Leadership, that how we all have to come together to deal with the problem in hand, to deal with the challenge in hand.
Yeah, but it's really, I agree with you. And it's really important, a distinction here, because Trump represents going back to basics. So the question is, what's basic or fundamental? So back to basics in one sense can mean going back to an earlier structure of consciousness that worked well at that time, at that level of complexity. Versus we're being challenged to find even more fundamental basics. And Gandhi didn't go back to basics in the sense of a retrenchment. He went into what was essential, and that was and that's what Heifetz is challenging. It's that these adaptive challenges are requiring that we find a new order of complexity of consciousness in order to solve them. And when we do that, it's more elegant. It is more basic, more fundamental. And so complexity, the other side of complexity is elegance. It's mastery in the midst of. And that's what's required.
Yeah. So Bob, now with all the wisdom that you've been able to accumulate for yourself, and you have worked with, as I mentioned, with a few of the best leaders in the world, if you were to advise your own 21-year-old self, what would you offer?
Trust your inner promptings. Trust that small, still voice which says, do this, move this direction. Trust that. That's what I would say. And it's interesting because I feel myself as I say that saying, okay, that's good advice for me now. Okay, trust that.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Because
Bob.
the dilemma never goes away. This tension between purpose and safety never goes away. It just moves into higher order.
Yeah.
So I'm pulled into something now bigger, but I meet an even more fundamental layer in my own fear. Or resistance to that, or I'm not enough for that, or whatever it is I meet. So It isn't that it goes away. In fact, it may even intensify altogether.
Yeah.
So bigger aspirations get met with bigger fears, or as you're pulled into a bigger form of leadership, higher order leadership, you must face the equal and opposite in yourself. It will emerge.
And let's say tomorrow the world comes to a halt and all that we are left with is one book, and that is written by Bob Anderson. And there's only one chapter that says, what do I know for sure with 100% certainty and surety? What would be written there?
It would be the last chapters of both of the books we've written. As both of the books point toward this integral unity leadership. It's some of where we started around consciousness and non-duality. And that if we could really get the fundamental principle that the spiritual traditions, East and West, North and South, have been saying for millennia, and India has been utterly clear here. If we could really get the presumption of our inherent unity, I mean, the spiritual traditions of Hinduism and the sages are actually inviting people to realize that directly. Come in to realize that. When you do, you realize your identity is unity. You are only unity. There is no separate self. Now that's a lifetime of practice. But leaders can get the presumption of that. Like, how would we lead if we founded our leadership that we're all each other? We are all completely one another. And from that, we are completely interdependent. Your welfare depends on mine. And interdependent with nature, with the ecosystem. It's all one beautiful, beautiful systemic dance. And then, of course, the other side of that would be diversity. Your skin color is different than my skin color. That's the divine dance with and play with diversity. I mean, just look at the natural kingdom. It's as diverse and beautiful and radiant with color. Just the fishes of the sea, the birds of the air, just like incredible diversity. It's an ecstatic dance emerging from unity. And we make war over it. Yeah. So at earlier stages of conflict, you have the Hindus killing the Muslims. You have the Christians killing the Jews. I mean, this is where we go when we're early in consciousness. So the higher order leadership would be the presumption of what the traditions have been telling us for millennia, that we're not separate. That when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, it's because your neighbor is yourself from his level of consciousness, right? So that would be the one chapter. Can we get that we have to reconstruct this new civilization on the principle of inherent unity?
Yeah. Thank you so much. And this reminds me, another friend of mine, Mr. Richard Barrett, during my conversation with him, he mentioned that in giving, you receive.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Bob. I think it was an amazing conversation.
Yeah. I didn't expect it to go here, but it was a lot of fun. And
yes.
I appreciate how you drew all of that out. So wonderful.
Thank you so much. And I think it was a sheer honor for me to witness the master, to witness the vulnerability at its best, to witness the authenticity and your ability, the ease with which you shared your experiences, your own fears, your own sense of inadequacy. in the very starting of this conversation. So thank you so much for being such a gracious guest. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's great to be with you.